All right, South Carolina recruiting update. The Gamecocks do, in fact, land four-star and number one dual-threat quarterback in the country, Landon Duckworth. Full circle recruitment. The kid comes back home and is in the fold for the 2026 class. Now, what's on deck and what's in store? A lot. We get into it right now. Locked On Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I'm your host, Chris Marler. Hope everyone's having a fantastic Monday, if that is even such a thing. So, we got a good episode for you today. It is a little bit, it's following media days. It's following the commitment from Landon Duckworth last Friday. I decided to hold off on recording Friday because I was under the assumption there might be another player that was about to be committed as well, which did not happen, and then spent a busy weekend packing. But we are back, and I appreciate you guys listening. Thanks to everyone that's listening and making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen each and every day. Shout out to our everydayers. Remember, we're a free and available podcast wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. This episode brought to you by them to take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, so here's how today's show is going to go. We're going to get into some of the recruiting stuff, get a little bit of an update, talk about Landon Duckworth, talk about some more stuff on the horizon for recruiting, where the Gamecocks stand now, what it means to land somebody like Duckworth, and then after that, we're going to get into a little bit of the recap from the week that was at SEC Media Days. Now, the big news out of Friday, and it was news that we saw coming, and it felt like it was only a matter of time until it was made official, and Landon Duckworth, the four-star recruit out of Alabama, who was once committed to the Gamecocks, he recommits to the Gamecocks and is now back in the fold in this. Duckworth is the number one dual-threat quarterback in the country. Was considering Auburn, Ole Miss. We did a show not too long ago where it seemed like Ole Miss was kind of out on Duckworth, and for probably a number of reasons. And then the other thing we talked about was Auburn kind of desperately landing a four-star kid out of nowhere that they weren't really in on until last minute out of Pennsylvania, and if that meant anything on the Duckworth thing. Now, this has been in the works for a while, and talking to people behind the scenes, it's something they have kept not super close to the vest, only because it felt like they were the obvious choice, but it felt like you were waiting on this one to just kind of be like a breath or sigh of relief of, okay, I know that it's been like up and down in the month of June. I know July has had some ups and downs as well in terms of recruiting. You've lost a couple big guys to other teams. From a fan perspective, you cannot have that happen with somebody like Duckworth because we just have not all of our eggs in this basket, but you're sitting there thinking like, surely this is the guy that we can believe is absolutely coming to South Carolina, and this is not something where our intel has been missed. And it wasn't. It was a really, really big get. And you did it on the heels of getting Kamari Blair, another four-star offensive lineman. And, you missed out on Samari Matthews, a kid that goes in, I think it was Texas or Texas A&M. There's a couple of those guys that you missed out on. But the way you missed out on those guys, you could not afford to feel like you missed out on Duckworth. Losing Duckworth would feel like a massive gut punch. Instead, you spend the week in Atlanta, if you're Shane Beamer and company, and you come home riding high. And there are a few people that wear their emotions on their sleeves as much as Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer coming home Friday night, talking about a big recruit they were getting and a big commitment from Landon Duckworth. On the heels of getting, like I said, Kamari Blair. And then, on top of that, now you're starting to talk about, like, who else is on board, because as he was going to, I think it was the Luke Bryan concert, which I'm not a fan, but we're not going to hold it against them, to each their own. At the Luke Bryan concert, Coach Beamer said, listen, well, if anyone else wants to come on board, let us know. We'll be here. My phone's on. I think that was specifically about one player, and I think you guys probably know at this point who it was as well. Maury Thomas, the running back that's currently committed to Florida State, or was currently committed to Florida State and then decommitted. So now you're sitting at this spot where you have got 2 4-stars in a row. Your class has jumped all the way up to number 17 in the country. You have 9 of your 13 players are ranked 4 stars or better. Now things feel like they're rolling again. Now things feel like you are back in a great spot. The average recruiting ranking, 89.9. And while you might not be in the top 10 or the top 15 of some of these classes, you're feeling pretty dang good about your class right now. I'm looking at where it ranks in terms of rating per recruit. 1, 2. You're sitting there at 12th, right behind, and you're barely behind anyone ahead of you, all the way up to, it looks like 8th with Texas. So 9 of your 13 players are blue chip ranked recruits or better. You talk about how that translates onto the roster itself. You're starting to see a turn, and you saw this last year. I saw somebody post this today, and I wish I could remember the name of it now because now I feel bad. I think it was Rob Gamecock. I'll go back tomorrow and look at it and make sure I give the correct person a shout out because it was great work. But they're looking at the blue chip ratio and blue chip rankings of the current roster from last year to this year. And we remember how good that team was a year ago. That team last year had 27 total 4 stars and 3 total 4 stars. That's a total of 30, right? You look at this year's current roster, not including this year's class, but this year's current roster, you've got 36 4 stars and 4 5 stars. So 40 players on your roster are ranked blue chip or better, or blue chip 4 or 5 stars or better. So, I mean, you've increased that by 33% year over year. You've increased it by 10 total players, and now you're looking at a recruiting class where you already have 9. You're halfway through the class, and you already have 9 total players in this class that are ranked a 4-star or better. So that's a really, really big deal, I think, moving forward. This is the Jimmy's and Joe's thing. We already know what this staff can develop. We already know what they can develop when you get a small portion of the talent pie. When you get 3 stars that are predominantly, like 3 stars and over-recruited or under-recruited and overlooked, when you have those type of players that come through here with South Carolina and Shane Beamer and the staff, you've seen what they've been able to do with that type of talent, how they've developed not just those players individually and going into the NFL and putting them to the next level. You've also seen what that does when they are able to develop them into their own scheme and system offensively and defensively, in the production numbers they put up and where they rank in the SEC with other players. So landing Landon Duckworth is a huge deal because people want to play with elite caliber players, and they really want to play with elite caliber quarterbacks. This is a kid that checks so many boxes from a talent standpoint. You talk to any kind of scouts, area scouts, you talk about recruiters, anything like that, he checks a lot of boxes that not a lot of other quarterbacks can check. He's already big at 6'3". He'll be able to put on some more weight. He's not a guy that I think is going to run like LaNorris Sellers, but from a passing standpoint, he's got a lot of things to like and a lot of tools in his right arm that are going to be really, really helpful and beneficial at the next level. And also a guy that's going to be able to compete right away. If LaNorris leaves after this year, which we all kind of hope and expect him to do, I would love another year of LaNorris. But if he stays another year, that kind of tells you that maybe he didn't have the kind of year we're hoping he would have this year. But when he leaves, you're talking about the number 1 dual threat quarterback in the country from this class, Aaron Nolan, who I believe was right up there with him, that's also in that quarterback room, and then old Cutter Woods, who everyone seemed to love when they saw the glimpses of him on the field during the spring game. That the elevated talent in that room is so high. It's just so high. And listen, Robbie Ashford was awesome last year, great teammate, really good kid, but the difference in talent between him versus LaNorris, Aaron Nolan, Landon Duckworth, and Cutter Woods, night and day. And so I think that it's fun to see how quickly. Listen, we all love Jason White. We love these stories that we saw in the first year, the Zeb Nolan thing, and I think it was Zeb Nolan his name. Like the guys that came in 2021 and during Beamer's first year, when you didn't really have a quarterback that could go out there and take control. You were playing with people that probably should have been out. No offense to them, and I'm saying this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but guys that gave their all for this university and this program, but also guys that probably would have been on the scout team in a lot of places or just involved in spring games in a lot of other places. Those are the guys you have to try out there to start games. And listen, God love them. They played their butts off, and they were great for this program, but the elevation you've had from year 1 under Beamer to now is probably better than any other coach in the entire country. I mean, you think about what he walked into and he had to put out on the field versus what the options he'll be able to have now. Like, you could make the argument on paper that anybody in that room right now, Nolan, Woods, or Sellers, and even Duckworth when he comes in, probably all would have started over anybody in Beamer's first year. So that is not a diss to those people. It's mainly a fact of, man, look at where this guy has taken us from year one to now, especially even with different coordinators. He has done an incredible job at being able to improve and improve at a position where, let's not forget, before Rattler was drafted there, you're talking about a position that hadn't had a draft pick since 1988. And that is a massive change at the most important position, not just in this sport, but in all of sports. So, very exciting times. Before we go to commercial, I do want to say, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about just the end of media days and some real big overreaction from Baton Rouge and some of the stuff that people are saying because of the fact that LaNorris Sellers was the SEC preseason first-team All-SEC quarterback over Garrett Nussmeier. Again, some of the stuff, it could either be sour grapes or just horrible takes. Either way, we're going to get into it, and some of the stuff will shock you of how much people are sleeping on LaNorris Sellers. I'm still getting over a bit of a cold here, but when we come back, we'll talk about that and more because Locked On Gamecocks continues right after that. All right, welcome back in. And before we get back into the show, I do want to give a quick shout out to our friends at Monarch Money. Listen, do you ever wish you were managing your money and it felt a little bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. There's a big difference there. I tell you what, the biggest surprise I saw when I started using Monarch Money was when I started tracking my spending and seeing how much I was spending on dumb, silly things, especially takeout or having groceries delivered. That was a massive, massive change. And then once I was able to make that change and figure it out, thanks to Monarch Money, I've been able to save. And like I said, stop just saving and budgeting money and figuring out a way to start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Okay, I want to get into this, and it's something we talked about last week at Media Days. And I'm not going to do it today. We can talk about it tomorrow because we've got a long week, and it's kind of evergreen content. But Media Days last week, I was there, obviously working with LouisianaSports.net, ESPN 104.5 in Baton Rouge, and then also, especially on Monday, Locked On Gamecocks. And so when I was there Monday talking to Beamer, I said, Chris Marler, Locked On Gamecocks, blah, blah, blah. I'm there with a Louisiana entity. And when they announced the fact that, hold on. When they announced the All-SEC teams Friday morning, the reaction that it got was hilarious. I talked to several people from around Louisiana and in that beat going into the season because it's not a rivalry, but there is a bitterness between those two, which is a weird thing because it feels like South Carolina fans feel like they should probably have the right to kind of complain about the way last year went, right? Like that's how I feel. Doesn't mean they need to continue complaining about it. It's a year removed, all that kind of stuff. I get it, but there's a feeling that it feels like South Carolina fans deserve to be able to complain a little bit about what happened after last year because that game was ridiculous and the way it ended was terrible. And I think that LSU fans, especially going into a season where they ended 9-4 or 8-4, whatever it was, maybe it was 9-3, I don't know, but them being able to then complain to be able to have something. They didn't beat Bama, they didn't beat A&M, they did beat Ole Miss, but they had a lot of opportunities where they didn't get to. They lost to Southern Cal, they didn't get to go make the playoff, they didn't make it to Atlanta. They had a lot of opportunities where their bragging rights were kind of limited, except for in the South Carolina game because that's where at the end of the season South Carolina fans were most upset about how the one glaring reason you probably didn't get in is because of something that happened in this game. Now, all that aside, it's weird to me that LSU fans are still on this feeling of you guys are so upset about that game. Sure, who wouldn't be? You guys complain about stuff that happened in the 2000s against Saban. Like we all get it. But here's the deal. The amount of people, specifically from that fan base that I talk to, that don't even have LaNorris Sellers on their radar as being a good quarterback. Not like, oh yeah, he runs the ball pretty well, he does some things, but no, like as even being a good quarterback. It's astonishing. Like to them, Garrett Nussmeier, who is a great quarterback, but let's not pretend like he didn't make tons and tons. Let's not pretend that throw that he put into Eamon Warry's hands that was run back for a touchdown was a massive mistake. Like when it mattered most against Bama, against A&M in that game, like he failed over and over and over again. Southern Cal, over and over and over again. So this idea, because Nussmeier put up all these ungodly stats, that he is all of a sudden going to be like the greatest player in the country, and to even hint that another player could somehow be better than him, it's absurd. Like it is absurd to think that that LaNorris Sellers shouldn't be in the same air as Garrett Nussmeier. You look at the numbers, and Garrett Nussmeier's numbers blow LaNorris Sellers' numbers out of the water. One of the reasons for that is because you look at the passing numbers, especially. Yeah, of course he had better yards, passing and better stats from that. Like you're talking about a quarterback that had 525 attempts passing on the year, which, by the way, 226 total passes more and attempts more than LaNorris Sellers. Right? You had one of the worst run games in the entire SEC, and you were throwing the ball. Like South Carolina ran the football in 63% of their plays last year. LSU threw the ball almost that exact amount. 525 attempts, the second most in the country. You had 220. And by the way, it wasn't like 525 attempts were like on the team. 525 for just Garrett Nussmeier. And for whatever reason, didn't give a lot of backups any kind of play and have them come in and throw the ball around the field anyway, or as well. So I look at this and I'm like, man, like Nussmeier, yeah, great stats, but also like, who's going to be a better quarterback this year? I think it's going to be LaNorris Sellers. Who means more to their team? LaNorris Sellers. Like that one, maybe you can argue more, but this idea that specifically LSU fans have in mind that LaNorris Sellers is just some running quarterback that isn't that great and doesn't really know how to throw the football, and he's I heard someone say he's a terrible passer. Terrible. Now, you and I both know that I'm not going to get into that because I've already gone over those stats over and over and over again to prove that he's not. But, I heard one person bring up the fact that it's like, oh, well, I mean, look at what Garrett Nussmeier did in the last 3 games of the season when he had a healthy Chris Hilton. Chris Hilton was like their 4th best receiver. When he was healthy, he had 7 touchdowns in 3 games to 1 interception, and that was against Oklahoma, Vandy, and Baylor in a bowl game. And then, the quote was, well, I mean, LaNorris Sellers didn't do that. Yeah. You know what LaNorris Sellers did against Vandy and against Oklahoma? He beat those teams by 25 points on average. I mean, what are we talking about here? And also, the close of the season for LaNorris Sellers was much different than it was for Garrett Nussmeier, because the close of the season for LaNorris Sellers was him putting his team on his back, carrying them 6 straight wins, and putting them into position to potentially play for the college football playoff, which, as great as Garrett Nussmeier was statistically, he was nowhere close to doing that. At home against Alabama, they lost. They were down 42-6 with 2 minutes to go before he threw a throwaway touchdown to Kyron Lacey. South Carolina's driving to hopefully beat them and loses by 2 on the road. Look at the similar contests, the similar teams they played. It's a joke. It's a joke, especially with how they close the season. So I'm telling you right now, I still have this as a team that I think, or a game where I think that South Carolina would be slated to lose, strictly because it's on the road at night, most likely in Death Valley. But we have seen how quickly this team has turned around and what they've been able to do on the road versus at home. And going into last year, Shane Beamer and this team, 2-10 in road games against the SEC. Last year, 3-1, won those games by an average of 20 points, and the only one they lost was by 2 points at Alabama. This game against LSU in Death Valley, I think that this could end up being the same type of game that Oklahoma was a year ago, where everyone's kind of counting them out. Everyone's kind of considering, you know what, those teams aren't that equal. They are a lot more equal on the 1s and 2s, like the starters, not depth-wise, because LSU has a ton of depth, but they are a lot more equal than people want to understand and want to admit, especially people in Baton Rouge. And if LSU goes into Death Valley and beats them, the waves and the effect that are going to come from that game are going to be massive for the cultural landscape. It'd be massive for Brian Kelly's job, and it's going to be massive for LaNorris Sellers and the Heisman, and it's going to be really, really big for their hopes of getting in the college football playoff. It might clinch it, even though it's that early. So that game is a game I feel like has way more juice to it than I originally thought, and I cannot wait for it to get here. I'll be there because I'll be moving to Baton Rouge in 4 days for work, and I hope all of you will be there as well. And we will have some beers and sing Sandstorm, not sing Sandstorm, and have a good time outside of Death Valley because it's a lot of fun to tailgate there. And hopefully, around 10:30 Central Time that night, we'll be celebrating another big Carolina victory. All right, until then, that is all for today's episode. We'll be back again tomorrow. And we appreciate you guys. You guys have a great rest of your night. Go Cox.